Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a really interesting project today operating within the Bittensor ecosystem. It's called VoidAI, and it's specifically associated with Subnet 106.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've got a detailed investment analysis plus various documents straight from VoidAI itself. We've really tried to pull this together for you, the listener, especially if you want to get informed quickly on these, pretty complex topics by getting right to the essential insights.
Absolutely. So what's our mission here? What's the game plan for this deep dive?
Well, the plan is to really figure out what VoidAI and Subnet 106 actually are. We'll look at their tech, their approach, and critically cut through the noise to pull out the key takeaways. Things like their current status, their potential, and importantly, the significant risks that the source material really brings to light.
Okay.
Think of it like getting a shortcut to understanding a project sitting right at that intersection of decentralized AI and blockchain connectivity.
Perfect. Sounds like there are some genuinely innovative ideas in the mix here, but maybe also some flashing red lights the analysis points to. Let's jump right in then, starting with the basics. What is VoidAI actually saying its mission is, and how does Subnet 106 supposedly fit in?
Okay, so at its core, VoidAI states its mission is to bridge artificial intelligence and blockchain tech. They talk a lot about cultivating a decentralized ecosystem, a place for innovation, collaboration, and ensuring equitable access to AI resources. They position themselves as building foundational infrastructure.
Foundational infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the big picture goal. But based on the documents, what's actually live right now? What can we tangibly point to that they're currently doing?
Right. The most concrete thing, according to these sources, is they're operating a Bittensor-to-Solana bridge. This bridge lets users wrap TAO, that's the native Bittensor token, into wTAO, a wrapped version on Solana. And importantly, this bridge is operational.
It's live.
Yes. They also state they act as validators on both the Bittensor and Solana networks. So they're participating in the security and consensus of those chains.
Got it. So a working bridge, validator activities, those are confirmed. What about the future? What's on their roadmap according to the docs?
Their documentation talks about delivering application programming interfaces APIs for decentralized AI. The idea there is to make it simpler for developers to access and use Bittensor subnets without needing, deep blockchain expertise.
Easier on-ramp, basically.
Exactly. And they also plan enhanced delegation features for their validator services. But, and this is crucial, the sources are very clear. These are explicitly marked as coming soon.
Okay, coming soon, we'll remember that. Now, this brings us to something the analysis really flags as a key point of confusion. What exactly is unclear about Subnet 106 itself?
Yeah, this is really key to understanding the project, especially within the Bittensor context. The analysis points out a real lack of clarity around the precise nature, the function, and even the operational status of Subnet 106 as a, let's say, distinct commodity-producing entity, like a standard Bittensor subnet.
And why is that ambiguity so notable? Doesn't Bittensor generally have a pretty defined model for how these subnets are supposed to work?
Exactly. The traditional Bittensor model, as you know, involves subnets focused on very specific AI tasks. Maybe it's text generation, maybe image stuff, data analysis, whatever. They typically have a defined mining mechanism where people compete to produce a unique digital commodity specific to that subnet.
Right, and they earn TAO based on that specific work.
Precisely, based on their contribution and the value the network places on that commodity.
And VoidAI's Subnet 106
Yeah.
doesn't seem to fit that mold cleanly.
Not based on their official documentation, no. The VoidAI materials, they really focus heavily on their infrastructure. The bridge, those planned APIs, the validation work. They offer very little specific detail about, say, a unique mining mechanism or a distinct digital commodity that would be produced only by miners specifically on SN106 in that traditional sense. Now, there are mentions in some community discussions linking VoidAI with SN106 and references to TAO, LPHAs, and any Solana token. That might hint maybe the SN106 designation is more tied to their cross-chain features, or maybe there's a potential subnet token called LPHAs, but it's not spelled out officially.
Okay, so the core insight here, the takeaway, is that SN106 might function more like an identifier for the whole VoidAI platform package, the bridge, the future APIs, rather than being a standard commodity mining Bittensor subnet.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
Right.
And the significance of this opacity is pretty big. It means you probably can't evaluate this project purely through the lens of a traditional Bittensor subnet's potential commodity value or its mining economics. The focus really shifts more towards the viability and, crucially, the adoption of VoidAI's platform services as a whole. It changes how you, as a listener, maybe an investor or potential user, need to think about its value and its risks within the ecosystem.
That really helps clarify that fundamental ambiguity. Okay, so moving from what it claims to be, let's get into the nuts and bolts. How does it actually work, and what are the key features, both current and planned?
Okay, let's look at the tech approach they outline. The design, they say, aims to merge blockchain scalability, specifically using Solana's speed with access to these specialized Bittensor AI subnets. VoidAI's validators, then, play a role in securing these networks and presumably helping the flow of information or value between them.
And the most prominent piece right now, the one that's actually running, is that cross-chain bridge you mentioned.
Yes, that's the key working feature today. It enables the transfer of tokens, specifically TAO moving back and forth with wTAO on Solana. It's designed to foster that interoperability, maybe letting TAO play in Solana's DeFi space.
Right, unlocking liquidity.
Exactly. And the sources confirm wTAO is an SPL token on Solana. They even provide the contract address. Let me see. 9WAKGC8 says XGOBUTATA FGAN KUNAFIKTHUM KON KINKON F PAMAHUB W4BFU PRX6 NRQQ and the bridge wrapper public key. So that's solid, verifiable detail, which is good.
Okay, and they charge for this service, right? There are fees.
They do, yes. The fee structure for going between TAO and wTAO is laid out pretty clearly. If you're bridging TAO to wTAO, there's a base fee 0.002 TAO plus a percentage fee. And that percentage fee is the higher of either 0.5% of the amount you're bridging or 0.0005 TAO.
So it scales, but there's a minimum percentage kick-in.
Exactly. So the insight is the fee isn't just fixed. For example, bridging 10 TAO would cost you 0.052 TAO in total fees. You'd end up receiving 9.948 wTAO.
Okay, and what about going the other way, bringing wTAO back to TAO?
That way is simpler and actually cheaper based on the docs. The fee is just that base fee, PO0002 TAO. Doesn't matter how much you bridge. So if you bridge 10 wTAO back, you'd get 9.998 TAO.
Interesting. So the cost structure isn't symmetrical. It kind of favors unwrapping.
Seems that way, yes. An interesting little detail.
All right, so the bridge. Operational, clear fees. What about those planned APIs for accessing AI capabilities?
Right, the APIs. These are described as a core future strategy. The main goal is to abstract away the complexity, make it easier than interacting directly with Bittensor subnets, give developers a simpler interface for real-time AI access.
Like a simplified gateway.
Pretty much. Planned features include things like secure authentication, easier data access, and importantly, a pay-per-call monetization model. But again, the sources are really clear on this. It's coming soon, which means it's a critical part of their value proposition that just isn't delivered yet. That introduces definite execution risk.
Okay, APIs are future. Validator operation. What's the story there?
So VoidAI runs validator nodes on both Bittensor and Solana networks. This is their direct participation in network consensus and security. Their design principles for these nodes, they say, aim for high performance, reliability, and security. They specifically mention using HSM's hardware security modules for storing Solana keys, which is definitely a good security practice.
Good. And they want people to stake with them.
Yes. They aim to attract stakers by offering competitive commission rates on the rewards generated.
Okay, so with all that, how can someone actually engage with or potentially earn from VoidAI or this subnet 106 based on what's described?
Well, this loops right back to that SN106 ambiguity we talked about. The official documentation, it just doesn't provide specific instructions or requirements for, say, mining a unique digital commodity tied specifically to subnet 106, not in the way traditional Bittensor subnets work. So that standard mining route for a unique SN106 token, it's not clearly laid out, not documented.
Right. So if direct mining of a unique SN106 commodity isn't detailed, what are the other avenues for participation?
You can participate via their stated platform services. First, you can just be a user of the operational bridge, paying the fees to move your TAO. Second, you could potentially participate via staking or delegation. But again, this is listed as planned. The docs say guides are coming soon, although the analysis noted the URLs for those guides weren't working at the time. The idea there would be delegating your TAO or SOL to their validator nodes and earning a share of staking rewards. And third, In the future, if and when the APIs launch, you could engage as a user or customer through that pay-per-call model.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Are there specific technical requirements mentioned for any of these? Wallets, software?
For using the bridge, yeah, the docs list needing standard things. A Bittensor extension wallet, a phantom wallet for the Solana side, plus enough TAO and SOL to cover the transaction fees. They also mention testnet tokens if you want to try it out safely first.
Makes sense.
But crucially, because of that lack of clarity on the mechanism, specific hardware or software requirements for mining a unique SN106 commodity just aren't detailed.
Right, back to that core uncertainty. Okay, let's just quickly recap the status of these main features then.
Sure. Based on the sources, the cross-chain bridge is definitely operational. The APIs are marked coming soon. The delegation features are also coming soon. And Subnet 106 commodity mining, in that traditional Bittensor sense, remains fundamentally unclear in the official documentation.
That's a really helpful snapshot. Now, you mentioned the bridge connecting Bittensor and Solana. The analysis brought up an interesting external connection, something about toabridge.xyz. What's the significance there?
Yeah, this is a notable point the analysis pulls out. That specific wTAO SPL token contract address, the 9w.qq one that VoidAI provides in their own documentation for their bridge. Well, it turns out it's identical to the one associated with a different service, toabridge.xyz.
Identical.
Identical. And other community sources, like tao.news apparently, list toabridge.xyz as being operated by other entities, specifically Creative Builds and Rather Labs.
Okay, so what's the implication if they're using the same token contract address?
Well, this strong linkage implies that the VoidAI bridge might actually be the same underlying infrastructure as toabridge.xyz, or at the very least, heavily reliant upon it. The insight here is, if that's true, it introduces potential dependencies and shared risks.
Like relying on infrastructure run by potentially different teams.
Exactly. Relying on the security and reliability of systems possibly maintained by Creative Builds, or rather labs, who might be different from the anonymous team behind VoidAI. The analysis flags that transparency around this relationship would be really important for users and investors to fully grasp the operational setup and the risks involved.
That definitely raises some questions about the architecture and who's ultimately responsible for what. Okay, moving beyond the technicals, let's really confront the risks and challenges. What are the major red flags the sources emphasize?
There are several significant ones highlighted, yeah. Security is obviously huge, and the cross-chain bridge audit status is flagged as a major concern. The documentation literally states an audit for the critical Bittensor EVM smart contracts that underpin the bridge will commence once finalized.
Will commence once finalized.
Yeah.
But the bridge is already live, handling user assets.
That's exactly the point the analysis hammers home. That specific phrasing strongly suggests a comprehensive public security audit for this critical operational component is not yet completed, or at least not publicly available. Operating a bridge, moving assets between chains without a completed public audit is flagged as a really significant risk.
Wow. Are audits mentioned for any other parts of their operation, like SN106 itself?
No, there's no mention of audits specifically for SN106 operations beyond this planned audit for the bridge contracts.
VoidAI does claim the bridge uses decentralized, fault-tolerant mechanisms, though.
Uh-huh.
How does the analysis square that claim with the lack of an audit?
They note the claim, sure, but they underline that verifying those kinds of assertions is extremely difficult without that completed public security audit from a reputable third party. It's hard to take it just on faith. The sources also put this into the broader context of ecosystem risks. You know, the Bittensor ecosystem itself has unfortunately seen things like wallet hacks and losses from malicious packages. And the cross-chain bridge sector, just globally, has a history of really high-profile, expensive exploits. The analysis mentions the wormhole bridge incident on Solana as a relevant example. The insight is bridges are inherently high-value, high-risk targets.
So, okay, a live bridge, apparently unaudited, operating in a high-risk sector within an ecosystem that's seen its share of issues. That paints a pretty stark security picture. What other major concerns are flagged?
A really critical deficiency stressed repeatedly in the analysis is the lack of team transparency. The official documentation provides absolutely no information about the team, the founders, the developers, nobody behind VoidAI.
And why is that considered such a major red flag?
Well, because it basically prevents any kind of meaningful assessment of their expertise,
Right.
right? Or their track record in building and, crucially, securing complex systems like this, or their credibility, their accountability if something goes wrong. For due diligence on any project, frankly, but especially one handling user funds and running critical infrastructure, knowing who is responsible is just foundational for building trust. The analysis flags it as a major, almost non-negotiable red flag.
Okay, that's clear. We also touched on the ambiguity of Subnet 106's function earlier.
Yeah.
How does that uncertainty play into the risk assessment?
It directly impacts the project's investment story and its risk profile, particularly within the Bittensor ecosystem. Because it's not clearly defined as a traditional subnet that produces a specific commodity with a verifiable mining process, its potential value accrual mechanism just isn't clear within that standard Bittensor model. The model where subnet incentives are tied to their unique output.
Right.
This ambiguity makes it much harder to assess its fundamental economic viability as a subnet.
And what about the reliance on those coming soon features? We mentioned execution risk before.
Exactly. That remains a significant risk factor. A huge chunk of VoidAI's stated value proposition, making Bittensor AI easy to access via APIs, offering better delegation options, it just isn't delivered yet. The risk is twofold. Will they actually deliver? And if they do, will the features work well, be secure, and actually gain market traction? Their current value is heavily leaning on future, unproven execution.
Makes sense. Finally, what about the environment they're operating in? Is it competitive?
Oh, highly competitive across basically all their stated areas. For cross-chain bridges, they're up against tons of established players. Competition there is fierce on security, trust, speed, fees.
Sure.
In decentralized AI infrastructure and APIs, they compete with other specialized Bittensor subnets already offering services. The sources mention Rayon Labs as an example, plus external platforms providing AI APIs. They also compete with countless other validators on both Bittensor and Solana, trying to attract stake.
And new players.
The sources suggest the barrier to entry for, say, launching basic APIs or maybe a simpler bridge could be relatively low, so threat of new entrants is there. Meanwhile, existing things like centralized AI APIs or even just tech-savvy users interacting directly with subnets represent significant substitute options. It's a crowded space.
That's a really thorough breakdown of the risks, technical, security, team, execution market.
Okay.
Let's shift gears slightly to the so what, the business model and the value proposition.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they actually trying to serve, and how do they plan to capture value based on the analysis?
Okay, looking at the business model elements in the sources, VoidAI seems to be targeting a few key groups. For existing TAO holders, the bridge offers that Solana interoperability, potentially unlocking DeFi uses, and the validator service offers staking options.
Right.
For Solana users and developers, they get access to wTAO within their ecosystem. And for Bittensor developers, those future APIs are meant to simplify interaction and building.
And how do those translate into actual revenue streams? How does VoidAI itself plan to make money or capture value?
The sources outline a few ways. First, obviously, bridge fees, those transaction fees for swapping TAO and wTAO we talked about. Second, validator commissions, they take a percentage of the staking rewards earned by people who delegate TAO or SOL to their validators.
Standard validator model there.
Exactly. Third, those future API service fees, the planned pay-per-call model for using their AI access services. And fourth, they also earn direct TAO emissions, but this is specifically in their role as a validator on the Bittensor network, which reward validators contributing to consensus across various subnets, not just potentially SN106.
Okay, what about value capture tied specifically to subnet 106? Is there anything there?
Well, this goes back to the ambiguity again, doesn't it? It's really unclear if SN106 as a distinct thing has its own specific mining emissions or a commodity-based value capture mechanism like a traditional subnet might. They might primarily just rely on those general validator rewards earned across the network.
And that ALPHA's hint.
Right, there was that community hint about LTHAs, maybe a subnet token. But there are no official details in the documentation about how it would be generated, what it does, or how it captures value specifically within the SN106 structure. So that potential revenue stream is, well, pretty uncertain based on the available info.
Got it. So why should our listener, who's exploring this whole decentralized AI space particularly care about this project, VoidAI?
You should care because, well, VoidAI is attempting something potentially really useful. Creating that liquid link for TAO onto a major chain like Solana could genuinely open up new possibilities for TAO and DeFi and beyond. And they're also trying to tackle a real usability problem for Bittensor's AI capabilities, aiming to make it easier for more developers to actually build with it through APIs.
The potential utility unlock for TAO.
Exactly. If they succeed, these efforts could increase TAO's overall utility, its adoption, maybe its network effect. It's definitely an interesting play to watch within the wider ecosystem.
You mentioned earlier something you called a second-order adoption risk. Can you explain that a bit more in terms of their business model?
Absolutely. This is a really critical insight from the analysis. VoidAI's success, and therefore its revenue from things like bridge fees and API calls, isn't just about them building and running the services well. It's highly dependent on external adoption of the things their services enable. Meaning the bridge revenue really relies on people actually using wTAO within the Solana ecosystem, integrating it into DeFi protocols, trading it actively, using it in dApps. The API revenue relies on developers not just having access, but actually building popular applications using those APIs, which then drives call volume.
So their success depends on the success of other things built on top of or using their infrastructure.
Precisely. Their value capture is contingent on the success and adoption of other projects and activities that are enabled by VoidAI. It's not entirely self-contained.
That's a crucial dependency to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And just briefly, what about the bigger picture forces? How do things like regulations or the fast-moving tech landscape affect VoidAI?
Right. The pestle factors, political, economic, social, tech, legal, environmental. Politically and legally, you've got evolving AI and crypto regulations, data privacy concerns, even the liability disclaimers of the bridge. TNC's mentioned Panamanian law, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Economically, the price volatility of TAO and SOL is obviously huge, as is the cost of compute power for validators and APIs, and just the general crypto funding climate. Socially, there's demand for this kind of interoperability, but also, critically, community trust, which, as we discussed, is heavily impacted by the team's anonymity. Technologically, the sheer pace of innovation in both AI and blockchain is a constant pressure. They depend heavily on the underlying Bittensor and Solana platforms themselves, and there's always the risk that newer tech or maybe even native solutions could make their specific approach obsolete.
That really puts it all into a much broader context, highlighting all those external pressures. Okay, so pulling all of this together, the features, the fuzziness around SN106, the big risks, the business model,
Right.
what's the overall investment conclusion that the sources arrive at?
Well, the sources essentially lead to a pretty clear qualitative assessment. If you do a quick SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, the operational bridge is definitely a strength. But the weaknesses are significant. That lack of team transparency, the pending audit on a live service, the ambiguity around SN106 itself.
Right.
Opportunities exist in the growth of both Bittensor and Solana ecosystems. But the threats are also substantial: potential security breaches, intense competition, and the risk they just failed to deliver on that roadmap of coming soon features.
And if we just boil down the absolute biggest, most critical red flags one more time.
The top concerns, the ones flagged most strongly, are, without a doubt, number 1, the lack of team transparency. Number 2, the pending security audit for the operational bridge. Number 3, the ambiguity of Subnet 106's purpose and actual mechanism. And number 4, the heavy reliance on those coming soon features for their core value prop.
And the analysis highlights a combined risk there.
Yes, it strongly emphasizes that the combination of an anonymous team and a pending critical audit for a live service handling user money creates this amplified tail risk. That's the risk of something really bad happening, a major exploit, a rug pull, whatever, where there's no clear, identifiable, accountable party to fix it or deal with the fallout.
So considering all of that, what's the resulting risk-reward profile according to the analysis?
Qualitatively, the profile is assessed as high risk. The potential rewards are seen as moderate at best and highly speculative, especially in its current state.
And the specific investment recommendation derived from that?
The overall investment conclusion presented in the sources is pretty direct: unfavorable for cautious or risk-averse investors, and highly speculative only for those with a very high tolerance for risk and a deep understanding of precisely these risks we've discussed.
That's a fairly strong stance. What's the core reasoning behind labeling it unfavorable for most?
The reasoning laid out is essentially that the sheer weight of those major red flags, particularly around transparency and the security audit status of the live bridge, is seen as outweighing the current tangible utility for anyone making, a prudent decision. The analysis basically frames it in its current state as more of a speculative bet, a bet on an opaque team's future execution and maybe a hope that nothing catastrophic happens before an audit materializes, rather than an investment in a clearly defined, verifiable entity with demonstrated security and accountability.
Okay. What would need to change? What specific milestones or actions could potentially shift that assessment towards something more neutral or maybe even favorable down the line?
The analysis is quite specific on this. Key conditions would include: first, public disclosure of the core team. Who are they? What's their background, their verifiable experience? Second, successful completion and public release of a comprehensive security audit for that wTAO bridge done by a highly reputable third-party firm with clear evidence that any issues found were properly fixed.
Makes sense. Audit and team. What else?
Third, clear clarification of Subnet 106's nature and function. What is its specific task? Does it have a mining mechanism? What's the deal with the potential alpha token? Fourth, the successful launch and demonstrated utility of that API platform, showing it's robust, it works, people are actually using it. And finally, just tangible evidence of market traction, significant bridge volume, real API usage once launched, organic community growth, maybe some meaningful partnerships.
It sounds like a lot of those boil down to building trust through openness and delivery.
Precisely. The analysis really concludes that the single most significant factor that could fundamentally re-rate this project and build the necessary trust isn't just shipping more tech features, it's a strategic shift towards comprehensive transparency about the team, about those underlying operational dependencies like the teobridge.xyz connection we discussed, about governance, and crucially, about verifiable security measures like audits. That's really identified as the biggest potential value unlock here.
Wow. Okay. That was a truly comprehensive look under the hood of VoidAI and what these sources are telling us about Subnet 106. We've certainly unpacked a lot today.
Indeed. I think it provides a really valuable perspective for anyone looking at this project or similar ones. Within the very dynamic Bittensor ecosystem, we've seen there's an operational bridge which adds genuinely useful interoperability, and they have these ambitious plans for AI APIs.
But just as critically, we've hit on some really significant questions raised directly by the sources. That lack of team transparency, the still pending audit status for a live bridge, and that fundamental ambiguity around what Subnet 106 even is or does.
Exactly. The sources make it abundantly clear that these aren't minor points. They're crucial factors demanding very careful consideration, especially when you're trying to evaluate the project's overall risk profile.
So as you, the listener, continue to navigate this complex and, frankly, fast-moving world of decentralized AI and projects like VoidAI, what's maybe the core question this whole deep dive leaves us wrestling with?
That's a great question. I think this deep dive really brings up an important point about balance inherent in these decentralized systems. In a space that really champions permissionless innovation, decentralization, how do we effectively balance those powerful ideals with the, frankly, absolute necessity for trust, for accountability, and for verifiable security, especially when projects start handling user assets directly?
That is a powerful thought to sit with. Maybe the real maturation of this entire space depends just as much on building robust frameworks for transparency and trust as it does on the next big technological leap.
Precisely. It's got to be both. So keep asking those critical questions, keep digging into the source material yourself as you explore. Informed curiosity really is your best asset in this constantly evolving landscape.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope it's given you a clearer picture and plenty to think about as you continue your own explorations.